and today I'm going to talk to you about naming muscles. So this is the first of your lab videos on muscles, and I want to point out a few things before I start talking about how to name muscles. If you look in Blackboard under section 10, you're going to see, here's the PowerPoint if you're taking notes. There's also a study guide which has all the muscles listed, and it looks like this, whole list of muscles. There's also a list of some connective tissues that you need to know. I would recommend you print that out as you go along. There are over 600 muscles in the body. You're only required to learn 49 or 50 of them. So just use this guide as what you need to learn. You'll notice there are some abbreviations: L, O, I, and A. L is location, O is origin, I is insertion, and A is action. So for each muscle, you're going to see a location and action, and some of them, about 7, include the origin and insertion. So anything that's on this sheet, that's fair game. And as I go through each muscle and talk about it, I will mention those things. But again, everything that you need to know and have to know is on this sheet. So make sure you print that out and use that as your guide to know what you need to know for the exam. Now, I want to talk to you about how to name muscles. So hopefully by now you have watched the video on muscles and how they work. And so now we're going to basically show you where they are. Whoa. Sorry about that, my pen left me. So just kind of as a review for hopefully of what you've learned so far, what do muscles do? And their primary function is movement. So if it's a skeletal muscle, it's going to move bone. Cardiac muscle is going to move the heart, move blood. And smooth muscle is going to move something through a tube, like food through the digestive system or something like that. So movement. And like I said, with skeletal muscle, you're talking about bone. And I want to make sure you understand, muscles always contract and they pull on a bone. They don't ever push. So in your arm, for example, you have your biceps brachii. This muscle, when it contracts up here, it's going to pull your forearm this way. It's going to flex your elbow to bring your forearm closer to your shoulder. It doesn't push the forearm back down. When your arm goes this way, that's a separate set of muscles. The triceps pulling that muscle back down. So just remember, when a muscle contracts, it shortens and always pulls on a bone. It never pushes. Okay? And there's just about always a joint, there should be always a joint between that a muscle is working around. Okay? There's something called an origin and insertion, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. There's always going to be a joint associated with a muscle. Alright, so when we talk about these muscles, we have to group them, and we can group them based on their function or their location. And so if you think back to your bone unit, we talked about joints and joint movements. There were things called, you could flex and extend, rotate, adduct, abduct. So there are muscles that could be grouped by either they're all flexors, or they're all adductors, or they're all abductors. And they can be grouped by location, like the muscles of the face or the head, the thorax, the arms, the legs. When you learn about muscles, there's things you need to know about each muscle. You need to know the name of the muscle and a description about it. So you need to know what it's called and basically what that tells you, what that name is telling you about the muscle, and we'll go into that for each muscle that you have to know. You need to know the origin and the insertion. You need to know the action, what it does. And for this class, we'll briefly touch on innervation. You'll do that a little bit more as we move along, but just know that each muscle has one nerve. One nerve innervates each muscle. So let me kind of review or let you know about origins and insertions. When we talk about origins and insertions, I'm going to draw an arm. Here's my shoulder. Here's my upper arm, my lower arm, my hand, and here's my elbow. Okay? So if I have the biceps brachii, it's going to be attached up here and here, and this is going to be the muscle. And you'll notice there's a joint between these two attachment points, okay? Because there's got to be something there. If it attached on the same bone, if it started and stopped on the same bone, when it contracts, it would just break the bone. There would be no movement. So there's got to be a joint between these two attachment points. Well, these attachment points are given names. You have the origin and the insertion. Now the origin is always going to be the non-moving. That's going to be the origin. And the insertion is going to be the moving end. Okay? So when your biceps break out, it attaches here at the origin. The insertion, the other attachment point, is here. So when it shortens, this is the end that moves. It comes back towards this direction. Okay? So the origin is going to be the non-moving end. The insertion is the moving end. I've kind of thrown this picture in here to kind of show you that when we talk about muscles, we're going to break them down into different regions of the body. You're going to have muscles of the face, the neck, the thorax, the abdomen, the thigh. But there's a lot of muscles on this list. You don't have to know all of them, just the ones listed in your lab guide. What I want you to notice is how they're named. And we're going to talk about this in more detail in just a second, but hopefully a few things might jump out at you as you look at this list. Let's look at this one, for example. The temporalis. Well, think back to the unit on the bones. We had a temporal bone. Well, this muscle is the one right over the temporal bone, so it's named based on its location. The brachialis. This is the brachial region in your arm. It's named after that region of the arm. You're going to see things that do things, some kind of action names. Pronate. Pronate or teres. You learned about pronation when you talked about the joints. You're going to see things that are flexors. You're going to see things that are extensors. Should be one, yeah, extensors. You know, flexors and extensors. So these are going to be names that tell you a lot of information. And what I want you to notice is a lot of times you're going to group these muscles based on what they do, their function. And so these functional groups, we have some words I want you to learn about different types of function. You know about flexors and extensors and pronators and supinators from your joint talk, but you may not have learned some of these special words associated with that. There's a word called antagonists, and this is when two muscles do opposite or reverse movements. So for example, a flexor and an extensor are antagonists. You have flexion, extension. Those are opposite movements. Okay? Pronation, which turns your hand down. Supination turns your head up. So anytime things do opposite movements, you call those antagonists. If two muscles work together, you call that a synergist. So for example, the muscles in the leg called the quadriceps, they all work together. Okay, they're synergists. The muscles of the shoulder, they all work together. They're synergists. If it's a fixator, it is a muscle that works together. It's a synergist, but it's involved in posture. So these are going to be really prevalent in your back, posture muscles along your spine. And you're also going to have muscles called prime movers. So in a group of muscles that work together, so for example, in the quadriceps, you have 4 muscles all working together. One of them is kind of in charge. It's the leader muscle, okay? So the prime mover is the muscle that's in charge. It produces the most force and kind of directs everybody else to do their job. Alright, so how do we actually name these muscles? When we name them, we use 7 basic criteria. Either direction of fibers, action, location, number of origins, shape, points of attachment, or relative size. So direction of fibers, if you look at the models as we go along, you're going to notice you can actually see the fibers on the muscles. And if you actually dissect a cat or a rat and look at the muscles, you can actually see these little fibers. Think about a steak. You can see the grain, if you will, of the steak. Well, that's the fibers. So the way those directions run will give you a name. So for example, these are the external obliques. Well, oblique is an angle, so these are muscles inside your abdomen, and you'll see they run at an angle. They're at an oblique angle. You have something called transversalis. Transverse means across. Those fibers run across the body. You can name them by their actions. These are going to be the same actions that you learned when you talked about joint movements. They can extend. There's flexors, adductors, and abductors. Remember, to abduct is to take away from the midline. To adduct is to bring back to the midline. You can say adductors or abductors if you want to remember which one's which. You have depressors, which means to lower. Levators, which means to raise. You have rotators. Sphincters are any muscle that closes an opening, like a hole. So around your eye, there's basically the orbit around your eye when you wink. That's the sphincter. There's a muscle around your mouth, makes you pucker. That's the sphincter. Anything that closes an opening. You have tensors. You have supinators and pronators. Remember to supinate, so turn your hand up. Pronate, turn your hand down. And tensors a lot of times have to do more with more like posture type muscles, but there's a few that are separate from that, and we'll talk about those too. Alright, so you can also name it based on location. So for example, brachii means arm, so biceps brachii and triceps brachii both refer to muscles in the arm. You can do it, name them on origins, number of origins. Remember, the origin is the non-moving end, the insertion is the moving end. So in this muscle, you have two origins. So biceps. So bi meaning two. So biceps brachii got two origins. You can name it based on shape. This is the deltoid, and a delta is basically an upside down triangle. So this is the muscle on your shoulder. It looks like an upside down triangle. You have the trapezius, which is a shape name, like a trapezoid. You can name them based on points of attachment. This particular muscle is called the sternocleidomastoideus. See if I can. Sternocleidomastoideus. So the points of attachment are the sternum, the clavicle, and the mastoid process of the skull. So you have 3 attachment points. You can also name a muscle based on its relative size, how big it is. In this case, you have the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor. So the major is the bigger one, the minor one is the smaller one. You may have something called longus, which means it's a really long muscle, like fibularis, which is on the leg. So what's the opposite of fibularis longus? No, it's not fibularis shortus. Everybody says that. It's actually fibularis brevis. So brevis is the opposite of longus. You'll have minimus. You'll have maximus. So those are relative sizes. You'll also, you can get a lot if you just look at the fiber direction. I've just kind of thrown these in here. You may see these words thrown in muscle names or actions or descriptions of muscle. This is a circular muscle, is usually a sphincter muscle. If they're convergent, if you have these fibers are kind of coming in all directions, a lot of times that's a muscle that can move in several directions, or it's pulling from several different directions. You may have muscles that are bipinnate, they look kind of like a feather. So these are just words I want you to be familiar with. If you see the arrangement of their fascicles or their fibers, you may see these in your upcoming studies. We won't talk about it a whole lot this time, but you may see it as you move on. Alright, one more thing I want to talk about before I name some muscles is the list of connective tissues that you have to know, and they are listed on your sheet. And before I move on to naming these muscles, you have to know the aponeurosis. And an aponeurosis is, let me write that down. It's a broad sheet of connective tissue. So it's a broad sheet of connective tissue. And you're going to have one, if you look on top of the head, there's a piece of connective tissue right here on the top of the head. That's not bone, that's actually connective tissue. It's a broad sheet called the epicranius. And there's also one that basically covers your abdomen. And this is called the lower anterior abdominal aponeurosis. The other connective tissue you've got to know is the linea alba. Alba means white, linea means line, so it's the white line. There's actually a white line of connective tissue that goes right down the midline between your two abdominal muscles. That's the linea alba. You see the word fascia. Again, this is a type of connective tissue. and it will connect muscle to muscle or muscle to bone. And one of the ones that you'll see is called the lumbodorsal fascia. So this thing here, this is the lumbodorsal fascia. Alright? And then the last one are your tendons. Remember, tendons connect muscle to bone. And so if you look at these muscles and you see like long rope-like connectors from the muscle that goes down to the bone, here and here and here and here, those are all tendons. So you need to make sure you recognize the red stuff is the muscle, and then the gray and white things are connective tissues, and they have particular names. They're either aponeurosis, linea alba, fascia, or tendons. Alright, so I'm about to move on to naming muscles, and I just want to give you a couple of hints looking at this sheet. Looking at this guy, we talked about the temporalis, right? Let's talk about this one real quick. The masseter. The masseter is located kind of along the ramus of the mandible. So we know mandible, we know maxilla, our bone names. That doesn't sound like either one of those. So where did the word masseter come from? Well, to chew is to masticate. So masseter is an action. So this muscle is named based on its action. Okay? We have the, let's do another, intercostals. I'm just going to throw a few of these out to kind of get you thinking about how they're named. Intercostals. Well, in the bones, you learned that costals was ribs. Inter means between, so the muscles between the ribs are the intercostals. Rectus femoris. Like erect, rect means straight. Femoris means femur. So it's the straight muscle over the femur. Fibularis longus, the long muscle over the fibula. So that one has a shape name, long, or a size name, longus, and a location name, fibula. So you're naming that muscle based on two ways. So as we go through these muscles, just pay attention to how they're named, because you'll see some questions like that on your exam as well. And I'll talk to you about it as we move along. Alright, so we're going to stop this video. We're going to start at the next one. We're going to start talking about the muscles of the head. So see you in just a second.